Tyler Montgomery is a space geek. He loves Star Wars and Star Trek, Doctor Who and Avatar. But most of all, he believes that we are not alone in the universe, and he's dead set on proving it. No one believes him. He doesn't care. But what will happen when he comes face to face with a real-life alien from out of space? And more importantly, how will he respond when the alien is tall, dark, and handsome? Written by Mookie21. Tyler Montgomery, Aliens Exist, was not one of the topics I set to choose from your essay this week. The teacher barked at me. I shrugged, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms over my chest. All eyes were on me, waiting for my reply. I was known as one of those annoying students who breaks the rules and then justifies it with logic that usually resulted in my winning the case. Perhaps not, but the fifth option clearly said, a subject you take interest in. I defied. My teacher's face went from red to scarlet as her knuckles turned white from clutching her ruler so hard. I meant something real, she barked. The whole class laughed nervously, wondering which side to take and looking back and forth as if that would help them decide between the two. I cocked an eyebrow, getting on the defensive. Miss, you're suggesting aliens aren't real, even when confronted on many occasions with proof of life on other planets from water remnants and cells found on the polar axis? And is English not a subject to broaden the imagination with creative writing? So therefore, should a student not be encouraged to develop a logic in which he or she chooses as his or her beliefs? Considering there's more proof out there that aliens exist than there is of God, I stated clearly. The teacher just blinked at me, obviously unaware that I was prepared to stake my claim and stand my ground. Mr. Montgomery, I refuse to be ridiculed by my own teaching skills. Please go to the principal's office immediately. She growled, pointing to the classroom door. I rose and grabbed my stuff, tossing my bag over my right shoulder and my books under my arm as I walked toward the front of the class. Marco grinned at me as I passed him and winked back. Fine, but you've only proved me right, I said to the teacher, and then exited the classroom before she began to steam out of her ears. I headed up the hall to the front office where I found the principal's office. Teacher's gonna hate, what can you do? It was a good thing the principal was my uncle-in-law and secretly adored my aliens exist rambling every time he came over for dinner. Tyler. I was sitting outside the principal's office with my head down, my hands in my lap, and tapping my right foot. School had just ended, and I still had to wait for the principal to finish with a meeting before I could go in. Yes, I still had to see the principal, even though I went out onto the oval. My teacher had reported me to him herself after I didn't show. What a loser. She really wasn't fit to teach. I'm pretty sure I know more about English literature than she does, and she's supposed to be the expert. The door beside me opened, and a young businessman in a suit stepped out. He was shaking the young principal's hand, and they were laughing. Then they waved, and the guy left. The principal crossed his arms over his chest and leaned against the doorframe, looking down at me with raised eyebrows. Again, Tyler? You know this makes it 3 times this month. My Uncle Neil said to me. I rose to my feet and grabbed my bag. It isn't my fault your teachers can't teach, I defended. Watch your mouth, he barked, grabbing my arm and yanking me into his office. He closed the door and shoved me into one of the chairs opposite his desk, then walked around and sat in his own much larger one. He hung his head and rubbed his temples, sighing. You know one of these days I'll have to give you a proper punishment, right? He chuckled. I smirked. Define proper punishment. I laughed. Neil wouldn't let anyone else find out. But when he had to give me a detention or something, it usually meant me staying back after school, him buying coffee and donuts, and us catching up. Neil was my favorite uncle. He got me better than my parents did. Your teacher isn't very happy with you, Neil warned, sitting back in his chair and tidying up his desk. I rolled my eyes, sitting back too. Did she tell you that she set a task, and one of the options clearly stated that I could write an essay on a topic of my choosing? And when I chose aliens, she seemed surprised and told me I had to pick a topic that was real, I explained calmly. Neil laughed, shaking his head. Then she had it coming to her, he chuckled. Exactly, I stated, triumphant, as I crossed my arms over my chest. All right, fine, Neil said, standing and straightening his perfectly pressed navy pinstriped suit. He ran his hands back through his almost too long for a businessman black hair and walked to the door. Since I can't hold it against you for standing up for your beliefs, I must insist you try and tone down the rebellion, please. Neil went on, opening the door. He nodded to the receptionist, who was all too eager to jump to attention. Her clothes were close to R-rated for a high school. Her blonde hair pulled back into a bun, and her boobs were far too present in the room as she rushed off down the hall. What, you're actually going to give me detention? I laughed to hide my concern. Detention I could handle, depending on the teacher giving it. Even better, you're going to give the new student a tour of the school while I talk to his parents. Neil grinned enthusiastically. Neil was like me, evil right down to the bone, and we knew it. Right on cue, the reception slut came back, grinning her red lipstick lips at Uncle Neil as she talked to the man and woman coming into view. She stepped aside to reveal a short, balding man with black-rimmed glasses and a woman with once ginger-graying, frizzy hair, both looking haggard and worn but respectable. Tyler, meet Mr. and Mrs. Houston, and their son, Max. Neil introduced us. I stood and held out my hand, shaking both the man and the woman's hand in turn. They stepped aside to reveal their son, and my eyes went wide. He was handsome, with brown hair and blue eyes, not at all like his parents. He was slightly taller than me, and about my age, but there was something about him, something familiar. Hi, Max said to me cheerfully while holding out his hand. I took his hand and shook it in a daze. Well, that's sorted then. Tyler will give Max a tour, and Mr. and Mrs. Houston, if you would like to join me, we can discuss Max's classes, Neil said cheerfully and led the two adults inside, leaving Max and I standing alone in the hallway as my Uncle Neil winked to me and then closed the door. The reception slut vanished back behind her desk, cheeks slightly flushed. Obvious much? I put my hands in my pockets and looked around. Max was staring at me, smiling. It was kind of creepy. So this is the office, I muttered. Come on, I'll show you around. I motioned him to follow with a flick of 2 fingers, and then I headed towards the back doors of the office that led into the school grounds. Max followed close behind. The school was creepy after home time. The halls empty and eerie. What was worse was that it was still pouring down with rain outside, and the wind was blowing through the roof, making things creak. I could hear the distant sound of the school cleaners vacuuming, humming in a classroom up ahead. I wouldn't admit it out loud, but I was terrified of the dark, or being alone at night, or in a storm. So right now I wasn't in a good place. I'd kick Neil's butt later. So, what subjects do you like? I asked Max awkwardly, scratching the back of my neck as we walked down one of the school corridors, the rain beating against the windows that ran along the right side. I stopped and looked at the new kid beside me, watching him as he looked around the hallway, taking in everything. He was weird? And not even my weird? Weird. Subjects? Max asked, locking eyes with me suddenly and tilting his head slightly to the side, with wide eyes and an overly cheerful smile that kept both his lips pressed shut. His gaze sent a chill down my spine. Yeah, like English, math, science, society, environment, art, sports, etc. I tried as I scratched my thigh through my school pants. His eyes didn't seem to register. I didn't like the way he was staring at me, like I was something to eat. I frowned and continued walking, heading around the halls and pointing to the classes for each subject, rubbing my arms so that he hopefully wouldn't notice the goosebumps I was getting. When I pointed things out, he'd nod and say something like, "How interesting." But the whole time he continued to stare, not even for a second tearing his eyes away from me. I was surprised he hadn't walked into something yet. So this is the guy's change room? I noted idly as I pushed open the heavy door and went inside. The room was dark, cold, and empty, and I didn't want to be in here one bit. Marco liked to tease me because I was supposed to be a man, but I was still afraid of the dark. Well, screw him. He's afraid of butterflies. No joke, he actually screams if one comes near him, so I think my fear is a little less demeaning. Max followed me in, eyes drilling into the back of my head. I walked around to the lockers and pointed to a few. If you do gym, then you can use these to put your stuff in them, I explained, dumbing things down because Max didn't seem like a very bright kid. How interesting, he said robotically for the millionth time. I'd come to expect it now. I put my hands in my pockets, feeling around for my phone to text V, while Max's eyes locked onto mine. They were a stunning, gentle blue, which seemed almost out of character to him. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to my girlfriend, showing the new kid around as punishment. Probs won't make it over yours before dinner. Sorry, babe. Frowny face. I sent it and then waited in the silence and dank of the boys' locker room for her reply. Max didn't move. He stood there like a brick, glowering at me like I was the greatest thing in the world. It was freaky. I didn't like it. And finally, it got on my last nerve. Will you quit it? I finally snapped. Max tilted his head to the side once again, wide eyes still locked on mine. He rushed forward and I stepped back away from him, my back crashing into one of the lockers. Max placed his hands on either side of me, bringing his face close and searching mine. How old are you? He asked me. I was too shocked to respond, and when I didn't, his eyebrows raised and he smashed his hands back into the lockers, making me flinch. As his hands hit the cold, thin metal, the showers gushed on, every single one of them magically without anyone touching them. My eyes flickered to them and frowned. Max's still frame still leaning over me, waiting. He continued to glower at me and then frowned and loosened. Following my gaze, when he saw the running water, he stepped back, running his hands through his hair. The water stopped, just as instantly as they started. Sorry, anger is a new thing for me, Max mumbled, that overly cheerful smile returning on his lips. My voice was caught in my throat. This guy was a psychopath. Whatever, I said, and ran out of there, finding my way back to the office. I burst through Neil's room out of breath, making the habitants jump as my phone buzzed in my hand. Where's Max? Neil asked me, rising from his chair with a frown furrowing his brow. Mr. and Mrs. Euston rose too, sharing a look of concern with each other. Ah, he's coming, I lied and stepped back out of the office doorway, shuffling my feet until I was leaning against the office desk. On cue, Max walked into the office behind me, still smiling. Well, I believe everything is in order, Neil said to Max's parents after glancing over me warily and led them helpfully to the front of the office. Max can start tomorrow. The two adults nodded idly, like they were in a trance. As their son led them from the building, I watched them go, and as Max walked through the doors, he turned his head over his shoulder and looked back at me. His smile was gone, and a shudder ran down my spine. Creepy, I whispered, turning around to see Neil standing behind me. Thunder erupted in the sky, and I freaked out of my skin, letting out a girly yelp. I dropped my phone to the floor, and it fell into 3 pieces. I groaned and bent down to pick it all up and put it back together. What was that about? Neil asked, turning his head to me and leaning back to his office. I followed him, because my school bag was still in there against the wall. I grabbed it and put it over both shoulders, turning my phone back on. I didn't look at him, but I knew he was staring at me with his arms crossed over his chest, waiting for an answer. I shrugged. I don't know. I showed him around and came back. Can you blame me for being in a hurry to leave? Oh, and by the way, there's something wrong with the plumbing in the boys' locker room. I mumbled, distracted as I opened V's message. Oh, new kid? Is he a tractor? XD, XD? I snorted at Vienna's message and hit reply. No, I should be jealous. Tyler, Neil growled, and I lifted my eyes to look through my eyelashes at him innocently. Obviously he said something, and I missed it. Lightning flashed outside, and my heart skipped a beat. So my uncle sighed and grabbed his things to leave. I'll drop you home. Come on, he said, and led me around the back of the office towards the teacher's car park. He waved goodbye to the reception slut, and she was too eager to wave back. Outside, my uncle and I both made a mad dash for his car, which thankfully wasn't parked too far away, being the principal and all. We jumped in, and he bunged on the heating. She likes you, I grinned at my uncle, putting on my seatbelt as he started the car. Who? He asked, fiddling with his own seatbelt. The reception ist. I laughed, wriggling to get comfy. Miss Jones? I hadn't noticed, he mumbled, turning on the engine. He swung the car out and then sped up the street to the lights. Neil was a fantastic driver, having been trained by my grandfather, my dad, and his father, who was an ex-Formula One racer. How could you not? She was falling out of her clothes for you, I laughed. Neil smirked and raised an eyebrow to me. You shouldn't be perving on teachers. He chuckled evilly. Trust me, that's the last thing I'll be doing, and since when are receptionist teachers? That landed us both into one of our usual pointless debates. 10 minutes later, we arrived at my house, and thankfully it had stopped raining. We got up and raced each other to the front door. I won and barged inside, instantly making the quiet house loud and lit. Horo! My mom called from the kitchen, hearing all the noise. Hi, Mom! I shouted, racing down the hallway to my room to dump my things. Hey, Wendy, I heard my uncle say to my mom. My mom and dad were oblivious to my detentions. I liked it to keep it that way. As far as they knew, I was just hanging out with my uncle, which was all it normally was anyway. I jumped into the kitchen and grabbed a white chocolate macadamia cookie off the cooling rack, but I shoveled the whole thing in anyway, and then grabbed another before my mom could turn around and notice. You'll ruin your dinner, my mom warned, eyes in the back of her head. I smirked, almost losing Cookie, and sat on a stool next to my uncle. Schmro? I asked, mouthful. Neil whacked me on the arm and I laughed. I gulped to clear my throat and wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, brushing crumbs off me. Mom, can V come over for dinner? I asked, remembering my unfinished conversation to my girlfriend in my pocket. I pulled out my phone and saw a text waiting. What's there to be jealous of? Do you want dibs on him first? Smiley face. I smirked. Vienna was somewhat of a fag hag. She kept trying to convince Marco, Gunnar, and I that we were madly gay and in love with each other. It wasn't going to happen. We were all straight as a pole. In your dreams. Sure, sweetie. She's welcome any time, Mom said, tasting some red sauce on her wooden spoon. Just then, Dad paraded into the room wearing a sheet. Dad? I didn't know you were a cross-dresser. I blurted into laughter. Seeing my dad trot in with his hands out, doing laps of the counter island to show off his thing. My older brother is officially a moron, Neil chuckled. Dad gave us both dirty looks. It's a toga for the play I'm doing at the theater, Dad explained. My dad was a local actor. He used to be really big back in the day, but the pay hadn't been good, so now it was more of a hobby thing. For some weird reason, my mom thought it was totally hot. Ugh. You look amazing, my mom cooed, kissing her husband on the cheek. I turned and made gagging motions to my uncle, who smirked and leaned past me to steal himself his own cookie. Like I said before, my uncle is like me. My parents aren't actually too bad. They suit each other. My mom was petite and had short curly brown hair that bounced around her head with olive-colored eyes that always saw the brighter side of things, while my dad was tall, with dark Greek features, and liked a bit of mystery and adventure in his life. My phone buzzed on the countertop in front of my chest, and I picked it up. Yes it is, XP. Come over for dinner, I demanded in reply to her. She sent a reply right away. Do I have to? Kidding. I'll be over in 5. Kiss, kiss. And that was that. I think there was probably something wrong with the fact that V had her license and I didn't, so she was always driving me around. I think something like that always took a beating on a guy's manhood. Oh well, I didn't care. I was getting my license in a few months anyway. Stupid birthday, being born late in the year. 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang, and I ran to escape my embarrassing family. I yanked it open and grabbed Vienna's arm and pulled her down to my room. She laughed as I closed the door, then grabbed her face with both hands and kissed her on the lips. What was that for? She asked, going over away from me and sitting on my bed. I went over and joined her. I may have slightly been a little jealous, I mumbled, looking away. She laughed again. There's something you should know about Vienna. She laughs a lot. She's always happy, but if you cross her, oh, watch out. Don't be. She smiled at me and rested her head on my shoulder. A knock came on my door. What have I said about leaving the door open when you have Vienna over? Mom called through my closed door, opening and glowering at me. Yeah, Mom, because we're toast going to have sex right here now while you, Dad, and Neil are in the other room. I huffed, raising my eyebrows at her. Mom smirked and walked back to her kitchen. Yeah, go back to your kitchen and make me a sandwich, I'd joke. I'm not like that, really. Actually, I'm usually the one making sandwiches for the women. Why is that? Really, Ty? V smirked, lifting a brow at me. I smirked and kissed her cheek, before hopping up and going over to my comic book stand. V wasn't into comics, but she liked to listen to me talk about them. I guess it's because I was kind of passionate about it, or something. She always said she liked the way my eyes lit up. I frowned. Lit up eyes? Why did that remind me of something? I shook my head and took the comic book to where V was sitting. Latest edition? She asked, taking it and looking at the cover. I nodded and sat back down, scratching my nose. It felt like I'd forgotten something important, and no matter how hard I tried to remember it, I couldn't. What was it? Glowing eyes? What did that have to do with anything? Maybe I just had a weird dream last night or something. He's pretty cute, in a not trying to make my boyfriend jealous kind of way, V giggled, nudging me. I smiled and put my arm out behind her, leaning back so my elbows locked. Are you kidding me? I said in an overly girly, lisp kind of voice. He's like a total babe. V cacked it, laughing so hard she slid down off my bed onto the floor. I smirked and grabbed the comic offer, looking at one of the aliens that centered the cover of this issue. He was male as far as I could tell, with a greenish sort of skin and pointy ears. He had 3 eyes, spots on his cheeks, and gills along his neck. There was something familiar about it that I just couldn't place. Then I double took on his eyes. They glowed gray with streaks of blue and white. I gasped and dropped the book. My memory is returning. The alien. Tyler. I dreamt of him last night. I don't know why. I didn't even think about him before I went to sleep. But there he was in my dreams, leaning over me on my bed, asking me how old I was. He got angry and I started ripping my sheets apart. And then he tried to kiss me. So when I woke up, I felt nervous about going to school. I got dressed in a daze, skipped breakfast, and then bought a snack from the bakery as I walked in the sunshine. Yes, it was sunny for the first time in a while, but it was still cold, so I had a jumper on. When I got to school, people were gathered out the front entrance looking at something. I had a feeling I knew what, so I kept my head down and ducked around the back, avoiding the scene. I went to my group's usual spot under a tree and leaned against it, dropping my bag at my feet and putting my hands in my pockets. "Have you met the new kid?" a voice asked me. I rolled my eyes. "Yes, Marco. I've met the new kid," I said, trying to fight back the sarcasm. Marco poked his head around the side of the tree and grinned a cheesy smile at me. "He's a bit of a tractor," my best friend nodded idly. "In a non-gay way," he added, noting my raised eyebrows. Then he laughed and sat down cross-legged at my feet, pulling out an apple and taking a bite. "You seem in a good mood," I pointed out, sliding down the barky tree so I was sitting too. "Do I?" Marco asked as he hadn't noticed. He shrugged and took another bite of apple. The sun was really warming up the day, and it was getting pretty hot under my jumper, so I grabbed the edges and lifted it over my head. "Whoa there, cowboy. Keep the abs tucked away," V laughed. I tore the jumper off and pulled my shirt down, smirking at my girlfriend who had just appeared. My jaw dropped when I saw who was next to her. "Hey, bros, this is the new kid, Max. I told him he could come hang with us," V introduced, pointing to Max beside her. He seemed more human now, not smiling so weird and looking at more things than just me. He nodded to Marco and then to me before sitting down between V and Marco. "Hey, dude, don't worry. We'll look out for you," Marco told the new kid, holding out his hand. Max stared at his outstretched hand, not taking it, so Marco quickly pulled it away, embarrassed. "So, what subjects do you like?" Marco pushed on, trying to converse. I looked away, over at a girl and a guy talking a few feet away. It looked pretty aggressive on the girl's part, and while the boy just seemed amused, I tried to strain my ears to listen in. "And on top of it, you don't even answer my calls," the girl was saying. The guy sighed and ran a hand over his chin. "Can't you get the hint I'm not interested?" the guy said, smirking. The girl pouted, standing up straighter and pushing out her chest to somehow seem more appealing. "Why not? I'm hot, and I know how to have a good time." The girl tried placing a hand on her hip. She did a hair flick, but ended up just seeming snobby. "Sure, you're hot," the guy said, and the girl grinned triumphantly. "But you're not beautiful." And with that, the guy walked away, leaving the girl completely stunned. I smirked as the guy headed my way. He stopped in front of me and patted the top of my head before sitting down beside me. "Beating off another one?" I asked Gunnar, grinning. He punched me in the arm. "It's actually annoying," Gunnar groaned, laying back on the grass and staring up at the white clouds floating by. Gunnar was like a popular jock, minus the jerk attitude, so naturally all the girls wanted to jump his bones. Unfortunately for them, he wasn't interested in the hoes and sluts that somehow managed to get his number. Truth is, Gunnar's got it bad for this girl in the year above us. She's pretty, smart, witty, and wears glasses. She has red hair that she always wears in a ponytail, and she never wears makeup. I'm pretty sure Gunnar is the only guy in school that actually takes notice of her, because she's so shy and quiet. The only reason I know her is because of him. I think she's perfect for him, but he's too nervous to even speak to her. He's cool when it comes to other women, but when it's her, he turns to jelly. It's actually pretty funny. Gunnar stretched out, yawning, and pulled his black, muscle-tight tee even tighter over his guns, abs, and pecs. His perfectly tailored jeans made him seem rugged but clean at the same time. I don't know how he does it. I just throw on some jeans and a t-shirt and end up looking like, well, a dork. I ruffled my shaggy, curly blonde hair to try and seem cooler, but V just raised an eyebrow at me, so I stopped. "This is Gunnar, by the way," V said to Max, punching Gunnar's knee. He nudged her with his leg and made her fall over laughing. Gunnar lifted a hand to the new kid without even opening his eyes, but Max's eyes were on me again. I scratched my chin and looked away, pretending that the hole in the right knee of my jeans was suddenly the most interesting thing in the world. "What class do you have first, Tyler?" Max asked me in a friendly but ordinary way, different from yesterday. I itched my knee through the pinky-sized hole and bit my lip, pretending to think about it to stall, hoping he'd move on so I wouldn't have to talk to him. Every time I looked at his face, my dream would jump back in front of my eyes. But Max didn't move on. He just looked at me, waiting for my answer, so I finally gave in. "English," I said the one word and was done with it, but Max wasn't. "What room?" he urged, tilting his head to the side. 12, said I quickly, getting it out of the way. "With what teacher?" "If it's the same room as you, then it's the same teacher. So why are you asking?" I blurted, then blinked at my friends' faces, staring at me with wide eyes. I was known for keeping it cool, so when I snapped, it was somewhat of a surprise. Even Gunnar opened his eyes and lifted his head to look at me. I coughed to clear my throat and shrugged. "I mean, is that what room you have English in too?" I asked awkwardly, not meeting Max's eyes. Out of the corner of my eyes, I saw him touch his lips and thought. "I think so, yeah," he said. I nodded to seem polite, because V was still frowning at me. Finally, the bell went for form, and I jumped to my feet and grabbing my bag. I pulled Marco up in a hurry and grabbed his bag too, taking his wrist and yanking him off to form without even saying goodbye to V. Oops, I'll make it up to her later. She was going to see me first period anyway. I raced into my form class and sat down, hunching my shoulders, and Marco sat down beside me. There were a group of girls at the next table over, giggling and waving. Marco turned in his seat to wave, but I growled at him. "What's up with you?" he asked me, scratching the back of his hand. "Nothing," I said and sighed, sitting up. "Stupid new kid got me acting crazy. He's the crazy one." "Are you wearing contacts?" Marco asked me, frowning and staring into my eyes. I frowned back. No." "Have your eyes always been brown?" He chuckled, still looking into my eyes. I looked away from him, feeling awkward. Yes," I laughed. Marco had this habit of asking weird questions at weird times. Recently, he asked me how old I was, on my birthday. Then, suddenly, out of nowhere, Marco was attacked by the sneeze monster. "Achoo!" went Marco's nose. "Bless you," I replied. "Achoo!" Gesundheit. "Achoo, achoo, achoo, achoo." Ew, I'm not blessing that. That's disgusting. Duck and cover? Choo! "Mr. Diablo, if you could control your nose," the teacher said, coming into the room, amused. "How is anyone supposed to control sneezes?" I laughed at the teacher, who raised an eyebrow at me, like, "You want to go?" And so I shut my lips tightly shut. I was already in enough trouble these days. I didn't really need any more. But I had a good point, right? Why do teachers always expect you to be able to control the parts of your body that you can't? A kid got into detention the other day for farting in class. I mean, come on, for farting. Seriously, what is the world coming to? "You got a point, bro." Marco smirked, accepting the tissue handed to him by a brunette on the next table, who giggled when their hands brushed. Well, he is the Italian stallion after all. "We have a new kid in form today," Miss said, and my head snapped up to the door as Max Houston walked in. I groaned, dropping my head into my hands. Really? Really, world? You wanted to throw me a curveball like this so early in the morning? Why? Why? Okay, so maybe I'm overreacting, but I'm pretty sure this guy was out to get me. Max smiled and came to sit beside me on the opposite side to Marco. I didn't acknowledge him, but Marco did. They started talking about classes. Now we had the rest of the students' attention. They were all looking at us, Max, and talking. Not even the decency to hide it. I scratched the back of my head, messing up my hair and then restyling it for something to do as the teacher took the roll. "Tyler?" Marco barked at me. "Here." I groaned lazily, rubbing my eyes. "No, doofus. Max asked you a question." Marco laughed. I laughed too. Oops. "Hmm?" I asked Max, raising my eyebrows at him, my past laughter smile still on my lips. He was taken back by my suddenly friendly smile, and I quickly wiped it off. "What?" I barked, and he jumped in his seat. I was wondering what your favorite subject was," Max said shyly, and I frowned. "Oh, I don't have one," I said and looked away. I turned to Marco and grinned. "Guess who just got the next issue of Star C before its release date?" I said. Marco yelled, grabbing onto my arms and shaking me, making me laugh so hard. The teacher rose from her seat. Boys, if you don't calm down this minute, she growled. Marco let me go, and I dropped back into my chair. Then he sat back down. How? He asked me, eyes wide and kind of creepy. I chuckled at my best friend. Neil got it when he went over to America on a business trip. He gave it to me last night, I explained. Marco leaned over top of me. And you didn't bring it to school? He shouted, making the teacher huff at him. He winced. Sorry, miss, and settled. And get lucid or something? No way, are you crazy? I whispered and laughed. What is crazy? Max asked us, leaning forward to see us. I suddenly felt defensive. No one, I snapped and turned my back to him. Marco leaned in to whisper me. Why don't you like Max? He asked. It's not that I don't not like him, I replied just as quiet. Then he's weird. I don't like it. I get this weird feeling from him or something. I didn't tell Marco about Max pushing me up against the lockers and shouting in my face. Maybe it wasn't as creepy as I was making it out, but I already been freaked from the storm and the empty school and stuff. And what was with those showers coming on? And that weird thing with the alien earlier that day? If that was even real, any guy would be freaked. Hey Max, Gunner's having a party this weekend. Do you want to come? Marco asked. My jaw dropped and I whacked him over the back of the head, giving him a "Are you crazy?" eyes. He smirked, amused. A party? Max asked, glazing over for a second. Yeah, cool. Awesome, Marco grinned. He had this thing about always trying to piss me off. Troll. And so, with a party around the corner and the prospect of spending out-of-school time with Max, the week moved by in a blur. I managed to stay out of any big trouble with my teachers. Bonus there. But that was probably because it turned out Max was in all of my classes, and I was too busy not talking to him to talk at all. Lucky I had friends to distract me in every class. By Friday, the day of the party, I felt bad for rejecting Max like that. Forgetting about the first incident, Max seemed pretty calm, cool, and kinda cute. He was shy but outgoing. He was tough but had a cute element. It was weird. He was kind of a little bit of everything. On Tuesday last period sport, Max told me he wasn't the soccer type, and then right after he got on the field, aced the opposing team, scored 10 goals on his own, and won us the game. I couldn't figure him out, and I still couldn't solve that weird alien thing that had happened earlier. There was one thing for sure, my life was definitely changing, and I didn't know if it was for the worse or the better. The party won't start till I walk in, Marco shouted as we walked into Gunner's house. Music was pumping, and kids were dancing and drinking all over the place. Actually, there weren't as many people as I'd expected, only about 40. Dude! Gunner cried, leaping down the stairs and wrapping his arms around both Marco's and my neck. Hey man, I chuckled, patting his back. Bro, neck, breathing, Marco coughed, laughing. Gunner let us go and grinned. V and Max are in the living room, he said, and then rushed off. Gunner was kind of a loose rocket. He was calm, and then would suddenly snap and go wild. I left Marco to go find his girlfriend, and went into the living room to find mine. Vienna was sitting on the couch with two people. Max was on her left, watching V and her best friend from another school talking. My protective instincts kicked in, and I went over, pulled V to her feet, and kissed her right on the lips to stake my claim. Vienna giggled and hugged me. You seem to be doing that a lot lately. She smirked, bright crimson hair flowing down her back. She looked really cute in a tight black and gold dress that emphasized her curves, and the black heels that made her nearly as tall as me. Nearly. That's because I get the urge more lately. Are you getting sexier? I asked her, wiggling my eyebrows. She giggled again. Maybe. You guys are so cute together, V's friend swooned. I should probably know her name by now, but oh well. Thanks, Kate, V said. Okay, there you go. I'm not going to remember that. Max stood and stared at me, a hidden emotion on his face. I frowned at him, shrugging, like, what? So he just walked away into the crowd, the small crowd, weirdo. What's wrong with you two? Vienna asked me, staring after Max. I shrugged. No idea. Hey, babe, I'm going to go find the boys. Then I kissed her forehead and walked off. Hide and seek! I shouted, 3 hours later as I rode on Gunner's back around the living room. Woo! The 20-ish people left cheered. Marco danced into the room, his girlfriend on his hip. V was leaning against the wall, laughing with what's-her-name, and Max was sitting in the corner of the room on the floor next to a vase. The other kids I sort of halfway knew and half didn't, were eager too. Gunner is it, I cried and jumped off of him. He laughed and put his hands on his hips in a heroic stance. All right, to 50. 1, 2. Gunner started. Everyone in the room jumped to their feet and scattered. I ran past the couch of the living room, past Max on the floor to see he hadn't moved. He looked up at me with his blue eyes and I frowned. Aren't you playing? I asked, going over to him. I don't know, he said shyly. I felt bad, so I bit my lip and helped him up. Come on, I'll show you, I said and took his wrist, leading him through the huge, rich house. We ran upstairs, passing others, looking for hiding spots, and I ducked into the first room on the right. It was Gunner's older brother's room. It was full of junk. Perfect. I made my way through the maze, dragging Max behind me, and zigzagged through the stacks of boxes, bikes, books, and other things to the wardrobe tucked away to the side. I had to move a potted plant to be able to open the door, but when I did, I was able to find the wardrobe moderately empty. I climbed inside and pulled Max in with me, then closed the door. Now what? He asked. Now we be quiet and wait, I told him, resting my back against the wall and placing my hands in my pockets. Max nodded and sat down on the pile of shoes. I sat down too, crossing my legs. This seems pretty boring, Max smirked, picking up a shoe and looking at it. Boring? It's great. It's only 'cause you don't know how to play. By the way, how can you not know hide and seek? I laughed. Max scowled. I'm new, he said. I raised my eyebrows. Okay, let's not go here again. 5 minutes of silence passed. I didn't hear Gunner anywhere nearby, so I shuffled, feeling my legs going numb. Why don't you like me? Max asked out of the blue. I looked at him, then looked him over. Max was taller than me, handsome, talented, nice. Why didn't I like him? I scratched my knee through my jeans as I thought. You freaked me out when I was showing you around the school. I'm sorry. I was still kind of getting used to all this, Max said, sighing and tilting his head back against the wall, looking up at a coat. That was understandable. New school, new friends. It's enough to freak anyone out. Maybe I've been a little too hard on him. I like you, Max said. What? I started to speak, turning my head to him, but at that moment, Max leapt at me, pushing me down onto my back and laying on top of me. My words were cut off when his lips were smashed to mine, and he kissed me.